Bonjour and welcome back to the World History course. This is Professor Girard. Last time we studied the downfall of the Roman Empire in Western Europe and the beginning of a new period, the Low Middle Ages, aka the Dark Ages. Many things made this period dark for Europeans, but one key factor was a series of raids from the 700s to the 900s by people from the north. They are called the Norsemen or Normans. They're often called the Vikings as well, which technically only means the warriors of that civilization. But Europeans only encounter Norman warriors, not craftsmen or peasants, and so the name stuck. This leads us to a wider question. Vikings did many things beyond raiding. For one thing, they quote-unquote discovered America 5 centuries before Columbus did. But somehow in public opinion, they're only remembered as bloodthirsty warriors. So here's a question for you. Why did the Vikings get such a bad reputation in history? After all, every other warrior we've encountered so far, from the Assyrians to the Romans, were just as brutal. So why did the Vikings are the ones that get the bad rep? Think about it for a sec. Well, the simple answer is that history is only as good as the sources that historians use. We don't make this stuff up. We look for old documents and we draw our information from them. So which sources are available about Vikings? Well, pretty much the only literate people in the Dark Ages were the Catholic monks. And they happened to be the prime targets of the Viking raids. Monks did not fight well, they had plenty of money, and they lived in vulnerable, isolated areas like the island of Mont Saint-Michel, so they were often targeted by the Vikings, who, to top it off, were initially pagan as well. So because those same monks were the ones who wrote chronicles that modern historians use to retrace that era, the Vikings are generally viewed in poor light. We know of them through their victims. In this lecture, I will first describe the better known aspects of the Viking world, the Viking as warriors, and then we'll study other more peaceful activities that they were also involved in, like trading and exploration. So let's start with part 1, the Viking raids. Starting with the question, why in the late 700s, all of a sudden, did the Vikings begin to attack their neighbors? And geography provides some of the answer. The Vikings hailed from Scandinavia, the region of northern Europe that corresponds to Norway, Sweden, and Denmark today. And those countries, especially Norway, are located very far north, close to the Arctic Circle. Summers are short, the terrain is rocky, and land is scarce, so farmers were inclined to move elsewhere to make a living. And the geography of Norway that presented Vikings with a challenge but also a solution. The coast of Norway consists of deep estuaries flanked by mountains, the fjords, F-J-O-R-D. Think of them as natural harbors, well protected and with direct access to the sea. So it's only natural that the Vikings would look to the sea as an escape valve. The last ingredient was the Viking ship, the longboat. We know a lot about them because, amazingly, some have survived all the way to the present day. Some Viking ships would be buried in those boats, other boats sank in the harbor, and if the chemical composition of the soil was just right, the wood could survive all the way to the present time. As you can see from these illustrations, the longboats were somewhat similar to the Greek triremes of ancient times. They were long, narrow, propelled by a single square sail, and if the wind was insufficient or if it blew the wrong way, Greeks and Vikings could then use oars instead. But the Viking longboats, they were flat-bottomed, so they could be beached easily if they wished to raid a coastal village, or even they could be rowed upriver, even in shallow waters. So the Vikings raided as far inland as Aachen, the old capital of Charlemagne, and Paris in the heart of France. And at the same time, those longboats were light enough that they could be taken out of the water and transported overland if they encountered a strong point, like a fortified bridge, that the Vikings had to bypass. And yet, the longboats were sturdy enough that they could be sailed across the rough seas of the North Atlantic, all the way to Canada, as it happened. So a really versatile weapon, which caught Western Europeans by surprise. The British Isles were the first to be targeted by the Viking raids. They're located just across the North Sea from Scandinavia. With the longboats, the Vikings could appear unannounced and surprise ports and monasteries, and then sail away before authorities could summon an army to the rescue. When the Vikings realized how easy it was to stage such a raid, more raiders came the next year, because war was more profitable than trying to eke out a living farming in Scandinavia. And then more came the year after that. Because opposition was so light on the ground, the raiders stayed a bit longer, maybe a few weeks, or all winter, and then they realized that the weak Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of the Dark Ages were in no shape to mount an effective counteroffensive. So the Vikings might as well stay for good. And so they conquered the bulk of England until just one small local kingdom, the Kingdom of Wessex, lay beyond their control. A little digression here. I've heard many British friends tell me it was a matter of pride that only 2 people ever managed to conquer the British Isles in history: Julius Caesar and William the Conqueror. Well, if you remember from last time, the Angles and the Saxons, they also conquered England during the downfall of Rome, as did the Vikings I just mentioned in the 800s, and William the Conqueror, and the Dutch during the Glorious Revolution in 1688, if I'm correct. So remember that next time some English friend starts to act all pompous and smug about how England is invincible. Anyway, after their successes in Britain, the Vikings sailed further south from their homeland. They raided the coast of Germany, western France, and they even ventured all the way into the Mediterranean Sea. And this is where they earned their infamous reputation among medieval chroniclers. One monk wrote that the sentence, "Dear Lord, protect us from the fury of the Norsemen," that was added to the Lord's daily prayer. Another monk tells us that the Viking was nicknamed by his brothers in arms the children's man, which is to say, basically the Sissy, because he would not impale babies on the tip of his sword, as was the custom among his countrymen. He still killed babies, mind you, he just would not impale them, and this is what made him a sissy. Another chronicle mentioned that the Vikings once captured the Archbishop of Canterbury, the highest church official in England. This was a highly ranked captive whom they could ransom back to the church for a fortune, and so that night the Vikings had a banquet to celebrate the feat. They ate a lot of meat, and to have a bit of fun, they just began pelting the poor archbishops with the bones. You know, just a little bit of fun. But then they hit the old man so much all night long with the bones that they killed him, and they lost a fortune in potential ransom money. But boy, what a great night. We have other clues about the warrior culture of the early Vikings. Before they converted to Christianity, they worshipped various Nordic gods like Odin, many of whom were connected to, you guessed it, war. Their concept of heaven, Valhalla, that was also warlike. The simplest way to get to Valhalla was to die in combat, sword in hand, like a true warrior. Valhalla itself went a bit like that. You woke up, geared up, and went into battle all day long. And then at night you retreated to a banquet hall and you drank and partied all night until the next day began again with a new battle. Literature, that also hints at the importance of war in Viking culture. And the Vikings were literate. They had a system of writing called the runes. If you travel to Scandinavia, you'll see those symbols on ancient weathered tombstones, indicating that Lars, son of Lars, a blacksmith, was buried there or something like that. In fact, you don't even have to travel to Scandinavia to see runes. You have some right here on your cell phone. For the first and the last time in the class, I'm going to ask you to take out your cell phone and stare at your screen. Go on. Where is the rune? There's one at the top. Did you get it yet? If not, look for the weird symbol for Bluetooth. That's the rune. The guy who designed Bluetooth was some uber nerd, both a tech nerd and a history nerd, and he named the system after a Viking warrior and used a rune as a symbol. So what kind of literature did the Vikings leave us beyond those inscriptions on tombstones? Their main work was called the Sagas. The term has since then entered the English language, where it usually means something akin to epic, multi-volume novel about a family over several generations, or something like that. The original sagas of the Vikings, they were also epic stories, typically stories like Beowulf, about great kings and heroes from the past who spent a good deal of their day waging war and slaying monsters. Speaking of etymology, have you ever wondered what the origin of the word berserk, as in going berserk, going crazy. It has a strange Old Norse ring to it, berserk. Well, it comes from a type of a Viking warrior who would get into a trance, a state of battle fever, berserksganger, where they would get so mad that they would forsake all armor and just slash and kill anyone in sight. We'd call that man a psychopath or a madman today, but to the Vikings, he was the ideal warrior who feared neither injury nor death. So the stories about the Vikings are partly true. They were a warlike people known for raiding others, and their culture, whether it's a religion or the literature, was heavily influenced by war. In fact, the Vikings were so formidable that in 911, one king of France decided that it was hopeless trying to defeat them. Instead, he offered one Viking chief a whole province of France if that chief agreed to recognize the king of France as his superior and help him defend the kingdom from future raids by other Vikings. This kind of contract where a king traded a piece of land for protection, and that was called feudalism, and we'll study that system in a later lecture. That piece of land granted to the Vikings became known as the land of the Normans, aka Normandy. My father came from Normandy, so maybe I have some Norman blood in me. So warning to my students, don't upset me or I might go berserk on you. Maybe. My father had dark skin and kinky hair, so he didn't exactly look like he was a member from ABBA. And neither do I. Anyway, that province, Normandy, it had rich agricultural land, so many Vikings settled there, not to raid, but to take a local bride and start a farm. The province of Normandy still had a recognizably Viking flair to it a century later when it was ruled by a duke named William, or Guillaume in French. There are plenty of Williams in Anglo-Norman history, so this one was nicknamed William the Bastard. He was, you guessed it, an illegitimate child. Nowadays we spend a lot of time trying to build up the self-esteem of kids at school. Good for you, great job. Well, back then in the Viking days, they just said, your mom and dad were married, so we'd call you the bastard. So William the Bastard was still of noble origin. His father was Duke of Normandy, but his mother, she was a commoner, a working woman. The castle where William was born still stands today, by the way. You can visit it. It's in the town of Falaise in Normandy. When it came time to pick a bride of his own, William wedded a lady from Flanders named Matilda. She happened to be his cousin, so the Pope threatened to excommunicate the couple for being closely married to a next of kin. And excommunication, that was a big deal back then. It meant that you could not attend church anymore and that you go to hell if you died in that excommunicated state. So to buy off the Pope's forgiveness, William had two churches built, one in his name and one in his wife's name. So one is called l'Abbaye aux Hommes, the men's abbey, and the other is called l'Abbaye aux Dames, the women's abbey. Both were built in Caen, the capital of Normandy, and are absolutely gorgeous examples of 11th century Romanesque architecture. Caen was razed to the ground during World War II after the D-Day landings, but somehow those two churches survived. So while you're in town, you can also visit the castle of William, which has also survived, well, the walls at least. The keep is gone. But the most important event in William's life, that was yet to come. Early in 1066, the King of England, Edward the Confessor, died without a son. Three men claimed to be the rightful heir. A local noble backed by the English nobility named Harold Godwinson, a Viking chief who confusingly was also named Harold Hardrada, and our beloved William the Bastard. The Viking Harold led an army in northern England to claim the throne, so the English Harold walked all the way north to stop him at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Then William the Bastard crossed the English Channel and landed an army at Hastings in the south, which forced English Harold to walk all the way back south again to meet the other pretender in battle. And we know a lot about the Battle of Hastings because its story was preserved in a remarkable document called the Value Tapestry, because it's currently housed in the city of Bayeux, also in Normandy. It's a fragile piece of fabric, but amazingly, most of it has survived after 1,000 years. So add this to all the list of places you need to see on your William the Bastard nostalgie tour in Normandy, the Value Tapestry. That tapestry looks like a long strip of linen, maybe 100 meters long and 1 meter tall, and it reads like a comic strip. Most of it is very visual, one scene after the other, plus a few inscriptions in Latin if you didn't get the gist of it. It starts with Edward the Confessor dying, William being promised a throne, Harold betraying him, William preparing a fleet of Viking longboats across the English Channel, and then the Battle of Hastings itself. At some point, the Norman army thinks that William has died in combat, and a panic ensues, and then William raises his shield to show that he's alive and rally his troops. And then the Norman archers unleash one last volley, an arrow gets into Harold's eye, he dies, and the battle is won. There are a million little details worth saying, like Halley's Comet in the background as an omen that William should be king, little funny creatures in the margins, carpenters making the longboats, which is very rare to see because medieval art almost never depicted common people. Even a warrior who pulls up his pants to avoid getting wet when getting off the ship, which is a nice little touch, as if it was caught in the moment. But back to the narrative. When William the Bastard won the Battle of Hastings in 1066, he hurried over to London, was crowned king, and finally ditched his old nickname from the Bastard to William the Conqueror, which has a nicer ring to it. The impact of the Norman conquest of England was massive. The Normans introduced Romanesque architecture, and they even imported stone all the way from Normandy. So many of the medieval castles and churches you see in England, they date from that period. The new nobility also introduced many French words, which is why English today, even though technically it's a Germanic language, it has so many French imports. William also ordered a census of the entire country, something called the Domesday Book. The goal was mainly to track which lands the Norman conquerors had taken from local nobles and how many taxes were owed. But it's very useful for historians because for the first time you have a detailed list of all the inhabitants of England. William, that was not the only person from Normandy with far-ranging ambitions, by the way. One family from Normandy, they had so many sons that a bunch of them went to the island of Sicily, next to Italy, and they conquered it and set up another Norman kingdom there. I mention it because a member from that Norman family in Sicily, Robert Guiscard, then went on to take part in the First Crusade, which allowed me to tie, indirectly at least, the Viking raids of the 800s and 900s to the First Crusade in 1099. That's very useful. So, enough blood and gore for today. Let's move on to the second aspect of the Viking civilization that I want to cover, and that would be non-military activities. The Vikings didn't just pillage and conquer. They were also remarkable craftsmen, traders, and explorers. They didn't just steal stuff, they also sold and bartered peacefully. What could they trade from Scandinavia? Well, furs from Nordic animals like Arctic foxes, amber, which is fossilized resin, always useful if you want to recreate dinosaurs, wood for shipbuilding, or even exotic animals like the narwhal, a North Atlantic whale. It looks just like a unicorn of the sea. So its tusk could be sold to unsuspecting medieval buyers as the real thing, a rare unicorn horn. Less appealingly, the Vikings were also slave traders. They took captives wherever they went, but especially in Eastern Europe, so much so that the people there were known as the slaves, aka the Slavs, Slavic people. Russia, it is crisscrossed by extensive rivers that run between north and south, so by using a small trading version of the longboat, it was possible for the Vikings to go deep upriver into Russia, do some portage inland, and then catch a river flowing south into the Black Sea. And as what they want, the Vikings had a tendency to do some warring on the side. So one group of Viking traders set up a little kingdom around the city of Kiev in today's Ukraine. And I mention it because that Viking dynasty in Kiev was called the Rus. And as centuries passed, it eventually conquered so many lands that it created a vast country, the land of the Rus, Russia, Russia. Archaeologists working in Scandinavia have also uncovered some treasure troves, stashes of coins that a Viking warrior buried one day, hoping to retrieve them later on, only to die in battle before that. Amazingly, some of these coins are Muslim in origin. So you may ask, how come a dirham minted in Baghdad in the year 800 ended up all the way in a Viking coin stash in Norway? Well, trade. When Viking traders crossed Russia to the Black Sea, they found themselves at the northern edge of the Muslim world, and they traded with them. We have a remarkable account by an Arab diplomat / merchant in Fatland who met a group of Vikings while he was on a mission in Eastern Europe. It's not a very flattering account because, like medieval monks, Fatland looked down on the Vikings as being barbaric pagans. Fatland had to wash 5 times a day for prayers, so he spent a lot of time complaining about Viking hygiene. Quote, "They are the filthiest of God's creatures. They have no modesty in defecation and urination, nor do they wash after pollution from orgasm, nor do they wash their hands after eating." Unquote. I love that passage. When they did wash, according to Fatland, the chief of the band of the Vikings would wash his hands in a bowl, spit into it, blow his nose into it, comb his hair into it, and then pass on the bowl to his countrymen, who would use the same filthy water to cleanse themselves in turn all around the room. And if that scene sounds familiar to you, it's because it was used by Hollywood screenwriters for a scene in the movie The 13th Warrior, which follows a Muslim warrior who ends up in a Viking settlement in Scandinavia to battle monsters. Some of that script also borrows from Beowulf. While we're on the topic of movies, there is a TV series called Vikings, inspired by the real-life adventures of a Viking named Ragnar. Maybe check it out. And then there's a personal favorite of mine, the old Hollywood epic The Vikings, with Kirk Douglas. Super cheesy, but it was a great final battle scene and a top-notch Viking funeral at the end. Check it out one day. But back to our Viking traders around the Black Sea. They had such a fearsome reputation that the Byzantine emperor, who was based in present-day Istanbul, he hired some of them for the Varangian Guard, his elite bodyguard unit. The mission of these Viking mercenaries was to escort the Byzantine emperor whenever he went, which included Mass at the great Byzantine church of Hagia Sophia. We'll talk about it some more when we cover the Byzantines. Well, those Viking mercenaries were bored out of their mind during church services, and I get it, those services would last for an hour, all of it in Greek. So to pass time, the bodyguards carved out their name into the stone. That church later became a mosque, and a museum, and now a mosque again, but some of the graffiti in ruins have survived all the way to the present time. And that doesn't get any more world history than that. Pagan inscriptions on a church/mosque indicating faraway contacts between Vikings, Greeks, and Turkish Muslims. I find that fascinating. Let's now zoom to the other corner of the map in the northwest to study the Vikings as explorers. Moving west from Scandinavia, they found and settled many islands, such as the Faroes and Iceland, and these were empty, so the migration was purely Pacific in that case, no conquest or displacement there. In fact, the current population of Iceland is pretty much the direct descendant of Viking settlers. Just look at their soccer team if you don't believe me, especially when they're doing the big Icelandic clap. If you're a soccer fan, you understand. Anyway, from Iceland, the Vikings moved even further west, all the way to Greenland. And those names are a bit of a misnomer. Iceland is not exactly icy, it's more famous for its volcanic terrain. And Greenland surely is not green. It's mostly a giant glacier. I think it was just a marketing ploy to attract more settlers from Scandinavia. In that case, there were people already living in Greenland, the Inuit, or the Eskimos, but there was plenty of room to share, and the Vikings established 2 small settlements to the west and south of Greenland, where there was just enough grass, free of snow cover, to grow a few crops and hay during the short summer. And also some narwhals that you could hunt. The Sagas also tell us that around the year 1000, one Viking navigator, Leif Erikson, sailed west from Greenland and encountered a vast territory he named Vineland. Now, if you look at the map, what's west of Greenland, that's Newfoundland, and that's Canada, which means that Christopher Columbus was not the first to discover America. Leif Erikson was. He was there 5 centuries before Columbus. And by discover, I mean first European there. Native Americans had settled the Americas over 10,000 years before. So the saga of Leif Erikson sounded kind of fishy to historians until, lo and behold, archaeologists uncovered remnants of a Viking village at Lancemeadows in Canada. So the saga was true. Leif Erikson was the first European in the Americas. And there may even be some signs of Viking presence further south in what would be the present-day US. In the grand scheme of things, so the voyage of Erikson around the year 1000, that never had the impact that the voyage of Columbus did in 1492. The Viking settlement was eventually abandoned and never led to long-term colonization, in contrast with Columbus. Even the settlements in Greenland itself, they were abandoned around 1500. Worldwide temperatures dipped during that period, so the Greenland settlements, which were always marginal, they became unsuited for agriculture. So these setbacks aside, the achievements of the Vikings were notable. We saw them leave the banks of their fjords to raid and conquer territories all over Western Europe, from England to Normandy and Sicily. Start the dynasty that became Russia, trade with Muslims in Eastern Europe, guard the Emperor of Byzantium in the Church Hagia Sophia, and colonize islands in North Atlantic as far west as Canada. Truly impressive. I am proud of my distant Viking ancestors, assuming I have some. Well, that's it for today. Next time we'll study another group of people who raided Western Europe during the Dark Ages, and that would be the Arabs. Au revoir and goodbye.